Well, hello, Mhotep, and welcome. I'm Mog Morgan, recording for the Egyptian Magic podcast. It's been a little while. I've been quite busy with the project, really, one way or another, writing things up and doing a little bit more research and doing some lectures as well. Also, should mention that just the other day, one of the authors of the company Mandrake that I work for, that's Peter J. Carroll, passed away rather unexpectedly of a aneurysm, I think they call it. He was obviously a good author, but probably changed the lives of millions of people, I think, especially through his books and through his creation or part creation, whatever, or promulgation of the idea of chaos magic, which is probably one of the most popular, important, and influential magical or philosophical tendencies to have been created within recent times. So rest in power, Peter Carroll. Okay, so what I'm going to do is a series of recordings, in fact, based on the lecture that I've just delivered for the second Northern Occult Conference, which is north of Britain. The second, because they used to do a whole bunch of conferences back in the day, and they've restarted the sequence after lockdown and all the rest. And I've spoken at both of them, and helped with a workshop as well, which is even more popular, using some of the ideas of Tanchem, sort of workshopping them and explaining them, and kind of sharing headspace with people, really. So the lecture that I did there, and the workshop, I said I'd sort of record it. It was kind of, even though I prepared quite a lot of material, and I should say this is all part of a book, or series of books, really, or a grimoire in a sense, I don't know, just a writing up of my researches in the kind of hinterland between Egyptian magical tradition and my other great love, which is the Indian esoteric tradition, usually known as Tantra, I suppose esoteric tradition in India. You're thinking of Tantra. That's what springs to mind most of the time, really. So I'm doing that. Tantra, I should just say, it is the magical tradition of India. And for a while, I've been exploring the connection between the two. Anyways, the lecture itself was, even though I've written out quite a lot of work, almost like a chapter from this forthcoming book that I'm preparing, or which will sort of include all of this research. In the end, I kind of probably diverged from the script and pick things up as one does in a talk, when you are sort of a bit of improvising and all the rest. So I promised that I'd sort of, the material that I was going to share, I'll sort of record that. But of course, that would make quite a long recording, and I'll kind of find that long recordings are not as popular, so I'm kind of breaking it down into sort of manageable chunks of probably about half an hour to 3/4 of an hour. So I'm going to do the first section of that, and I'm also told that the first section that I did, even though I kind of quite liked it and everything like that, people sort of really liked about when I got to the second section, when I talked about kind of some of the meaty topics within Tantra itself. So the series will be clearly marked, and you can skip forward to the sort of second version, the second episode, if you like, in this series. And you might find that hopefully more lively or more the sort of material that you want to know. Because the first part, I really talked about my journey, my particular journey into this material in the first place, how I got there and how I got to this particular topic. So I'm still going to record that now, but as I say, I'm happy if you skim through this bit and go to the second bit, which is probably of interest, I think, as well, right? Developing some maybe unexpected views of what tantric material is quite like. And I say that because the book that goes with this section that I was kind of showing around at the thing is actually called Star Maps. And the Star Maps book, again, I'm going to have to go through I've both of these books, so the one in progress and the Star Map book, are going to be, it's going to take me a few videos to kind of unpack and introduce some of those ideas, which are kind of quite valuable. I've done some of that in the Jake Stratton Kent lecture I did on Star Maps, and the Star Maps book is out now. And strangely enough, it is related to and part of the same project. The reason I did the Star Maps book is because I was working on this connection between Egypt and India, specifically between Egyptian kind of ideas about the body, which come quite early on, and how they might have influenced and be reflected, and how we might understand them better by understanding some of the tantric ideas. Anyway, there's quite a lot of assumptions that you have to make, or I have to make, in order for you to get into this material. So hence why I have to kind of make these videos to try and argue for it. So that's the book. I think I'll put a little picture of the cover up on the screen. It's rather nice and everything. That doesn't have the material in this lecture, but it as I say, you need to know a little bit about Egyptian star maps and stellar law and the way they use that, and the rituals as well, specifically, that go with that, in order to kind of make certain sense of the tantric material, which also has a sort of stellar law to it, which is not so well known. It's well known to me, and I've kind of written about it a bit, but I know it can be difficult to access that material. You tend to sort of get sidelined into astronomy, or rather astrology, which is a big tradition in India as well, without really understanding how that material kind of plays a part in tantric tradition. So Tantra, the presumption I made when I did the lecture was that whatever you might have heard about it in the past, which I'm not saying is wrong, but maybe is only part of the picture. Tantra is a big religious tradition, a living religious tradition, and essentially I'd say is the magical system of India. So that means there's going to be a lot in there. And we're only going to, in the lecture, I was only able to touch on about a couple of different topics from quite a large list of different things that are both parallels with Egypt, but also are interesting in their own right, and are much misunderstood as well, I would say. Okay, so this is my first bit of the introduction. So I wanted to talk about first about myself a little bit, and my journey into the tantric material, which as I say, is the magical system of India. That's the presumption that I'm going to make. For the description of who I was at the Northern Occult Conference, which was held last weekend, I think.
I suggested you could call me, because I always ask you to explain who you are. A Heseret, that's one of Thoth. Heseret means one of Thoth, which is an old way of designating someone who had studied the mysteries for a certain amount of time, initially starting out as a disciple. You could also say these sort of people is someone who loves knowledge. And I've spent many years on this quest, including some in the academic realm, initially in the area of Oriental studies. So that's how I started out, was actually studying Oriental studies at Oxford, mostly Sanskrit, a thing called Ayurvedic medicine and philosophy, Ayurveda, the medical system, medical history, and through that, Tantra. My first initiation ended up, because I was so interested in India and for all sorts of reasons, was into all of that. So I get into all this stuff, and strangely enough, one of the early sources that I come across, they talk about the siddhas, the magical powers, or also a group of people who have these powers or ideas. It's said that one particular group of siddhas actually comes from Egypt. So strangely, what goes around comes around, as I say. So I'm into India, and it sort of directs you to go and look at Egypt, which is not unusual. So I was led to explore their mysteries, which were a little bit obscure in both areas, I suppose you'd say. But I was fortunate enough to have, some pretty good teachers, and I would say inner guides, one way or another. There's a nice summary of this that I stuck on my Facebook page that sort of also puts it in. I think I'll put that on the screen. Indic, or Sanskrit if you like, but I'd say Indic, all languages in the area. There's a term, Varma. It's maybe known to you, which means left, of the left. And also the noble or beautiful woman. It's a picture from the Egyptian tradition. Thus, the left-hand path, which people talk about, Vamamag, is particularly associated with the feminine mysteries. This is Tantra, the goals of which, according to the earliest texts, which I will look at in a later thing, the goals are bhukti, supernatural powers, and mukti, liberation. The tantric adept aims to become a vidyadhara, which is a knowledge holder or a hero, or pada prakara, which I say means far strider. In my earlier introduction, I talked about one who loves knowledge, the issue of knowledge, Gnosticism, and there you have it in Tantra too. Not something that people talk about very much when they describe in Tantra, that its aim is to become a holder of knowledge, someone who is a source of knowledge for other people. Anyway, I want to just leave that there. It may seem obvious or not, but the magic of Egypt does have an iteration or a version in India. You could also say that they share a common language, or to use a posher term, a shared ritual syntax. And this idea of a ritual syntax within Tantra comes from Professor Alex Sanderson, who's over the last 40, 50 years has become the main expert on Tantra in the academic field, and his work is filtering out to the kind of non-academic world as well. I think he might have retired, but he's still one of the most important names in technical tantric studies. As it happens, I was fortunate enough to study with him many, many years ago. And of course, he was talking about certain practices within Tantra, and we could also apply this to the broader worldview, which is what I can do from an Egyptian point of view.
And I've explored this in an earlier book, the ritual the syntax, the shared ritual language between Egypt and India. The first thing I published on this, I think, was the book about the goddess Isis in India, or in the Indian subcontinent, and how her cult was celebrated there, strangely enough. The strange journey she made from Egypt to the shores of southern India in Kerala. I also wanted to kind of, in the boring bit, if you like, to say something that's not sufficiently discussed, which we might call the social aspects of magic, the social aspects of any religion, including Tantra. Egypt, of course, is noted for its concept of Ma'at, which is justice and cosmic balance. All deities there, even those that you might think of as demonic, such as the god Set, in the end, they uphold Ma'at. Now, Tantra, on the other hand, is not noted for being socially minded, especially early Tantra, which is often said to be a bit more extreme in its ideas. And some of these threads are still there. In my own particular modern sect, if you like, of Tantra, which is kind of a bit more of a compromise, called East-West, which is known as a Mukos. The idea of equipoise or balance is in fact valued. Now, this might be a modern concern that's been inserted into what is essentially an ancient practice. So a definition, what is a social religion, or what is the social aspects of a religion? Yeah, I mean, I talked about this in the talk that you could sum it as batches, matches, and dispatches, right? In a kind of old joke. The religion of these Shaivas appears to see itself as beyond social religion upon which it drew. Instead of being a body of social rules for everybody, it was a religion of power-seeking specialists who recognized those social rules, but who followed also a higher authority, which put them on the fast track to the acquisition of supernatural powers and to an empowering, liberated state. So they don't do weddings, in other words, they don't do baptisms, and they don't do funerals, apart from their own, maybe. This would explain, for example, where the Nishvasa Tantra, which we're going to look at, is a very unfamiliar name. I will have to screen that, but a book, if you like, an old book that has this stuff here, does not have any rituals of social religion. As I say, there are no rites in that book for people, for births, deaths, or marriages, which are the main concerns people have in some ways. No rights for the expiation of transgression of social religious rules. No punishments or laws or anything like that. Nor did it describe any hierarchy of initiates within the religion, which is another thing. There's no hierarchy of, like we get in Western esotericism, of grades and all the rest. Nor does it make any reference to monasteries or temples belonging to Tantra. There were students, so I guess they must have lived somewhere or gathered somewhere, and there was a simple ritual for consecrating them into the tradition, yeah, as you have everywhere, but nothing particularly starting. All members of the religion are simply described as practitioners. So you don't get high priest, priestess, and all this sort of stuff. Everybody is just a practitioner. It's true that there is mention of ritual assistants, but these are also practitioners, just other practitioners, if you like. Calling them an assistant implies that they might be kind of lower down the pecking order, but they just have to be there. Considerations of caste do not restrict, or class, social class, are not supposed to block your access to this religion.
this isn't completely true, because there are some sects, if you like, groups such as the Pashupatas, which are considered a sort of tantric-y related thing, and everybody who does that is stipulated has to be a Brahmin male. But so caste and class is alluded to and recognized in some of these different groups, but some don't. Female initiates are not mentioned. And some scholars say that, so you can say that they didn't think about it, or you could put it the other way. There's just no clear statement whether the practitioner even has to be married. So there's presumption maybe that they're going to be male, but I think given that this, as I say, the tradition is very much focused on the female mysteries, and some of the practices actually require assistance from someone who knows what they're, in a way, you're getting the knowledge from a female assistant. I think it must be, you could put it the other way. It's so common that they didn't even think to mention it. And as most of the sources are written but later on by kind of intellectual men, basically, maybe they were, you could say they're appropriating, or they just left it out. There are actually female tantric gurus now, or certainly assistants over the last few centuries. So you can presume it was that. You could even go further and say the tradition actually comes from them, right? But the way that happens is overlaid. Tantra also acted as a countercultural movement, so it's said, because of it doesn't have this rigid social and religious hierarchy that you would get amongst Brahmanical religion. It does offer supposedly a direct experiential path to liberation, to empowerment, that is open to everybody, regardless of your gender or your caste or whatever. And this makes it very appealing to women and other groups that would normally be marginalized. So the mysteries come from women, but also it's very appealing to women because they can participate in it. So it's sort of slightly contradictory here. Early Tantra did interact with all these principles of social justice. It did challenge, as I say, caste and class. It did empower women, seemingly. Women are not seen as docile and passive. And it does interact with a divine female power known as the Shakti, which, as in Egypt, is like the goddess Nuit. She is like the cosmic Shakti as well. So it includes all sorts of people in its ritual that the other groups wouldn't completely like. So that's perhaps how it's seen as transgressive. It broke taboos, engaged with impure substances, and broke lots of sexual restrictions. And this may have had an effect of undermining the social and religious boundaries of its day. This is debatable, and it is quite likely. I think everything is sacred according to Tantra. It was taught that the traditional profane or impure was also part of the divine. Things that people thought was impure, it doesn't go with that at all. So it's countering all the ideologies that created social hierarchies based on purity, and it treats everybody's experience as potentially sacred. So, and it redefines gender and power, especially in the early tantric texts, such as the Yoni Tantra, good name, stipulated that every woman should be worshipped as a goddess, and stipulated that practices must be equal. In modernity, in the modern age, there's a sort of rebellious spirit that people take from that in the 20th century seemed to be the way it manifested and led to
as part of the actual liberation movement of India from British rule, where the goddess Kali was invoked as a symbol of power and independence. And today it's seen as the historical social justice project that challenged patriarchy and elitism and imperialism in lots of ways. Although, as I say, things are all changing one way or another. But I think credit where credit is due. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to talk about was sex and reproduction. Tantra is famous for its attitudes to sex and to the body and to sexuality. And here, anybody who studies Egyptian magic, the Egyptian mage, is very much in agreement. Although this aspect of Egyptian culture has been downplayed or ignored historically. But here's a quote from a well-known scholar of Egyptian tradition. She says it's a well-established fact that the creation of the orderly Egyptian world from chaos may be construed as a sexual act through which one god created two other gods of different genders, thus setting free the components of all subsequent creative activity. These mechanisms have been presented everywhere. You see them everywhere in Egyptian visual culture. And it's been demonstrated time and time again that sexuality was the underlying force, even in things like funeral beliefs of everybody, not just the royals, but the non-royal elite. And that through the symbol and metaphors of sex and reproduction and images in the little chapels that you get in tombs, they declared an aspiration to be reborn. And to be reborn through their own creative force in order to achieve an eternal life in the cosmos. So birth, return to the source, rebirth, reproduction, and sex. It's all entangled in that idea in Egypt as much as it is in India. India and Egypt share another common space where ritual, including tantric, has to be coordinated to astronomy. So this is where I was talking about the star maps, if you like, how they have this unexpected role that they play in ritual in both places. More well known in Egypt, if you see the star maps book, but it's still there, perhaps ignored in some quarters within the tantric tradition as well. So you have to be coordinated to the cosmos, the movement of the planets, and the constellations, led as they are in a diurnal motion around the pole star, which in the Indic language is known as Dhruva. And it is led or pushed, if you like, by a group of 7 sages or shamans known as the Sapta Rishi, who play a big role in Indian culture. They actually write the Vedas for a start, but they are also a group of stars in the heavens that are circulating, are always there, and are known to us as the Big Dipper or Ursa Major, which is very well known to us, in fact. There are many other direct streams of Egyptian influence into India. One of my favorites is the invasion by Alexander the Great, whose Egyptian name was Septapenra Meriamun, which translates, bit of a mouthful, as chosen of Ra, beloved of Amun. As I say, that was Alexander the Great, who was actually a pharaoh of Egypt. He penetrated India as well. He went from India, from the Near East rather, across into India, eventually through Afghanistan, as far as the River Indus when he turned back. But all of that area, then known as Bactria, remained under the control of the Egyptians and the Greeks until its collapse in about 135 BC rather. Invasions by other nomadic groups sort of wiped it out. Unfortunately, the Dark Ages descended for a little while, or different things. And what were kind of what you would call Hellenistic centers within Egypt, within India, they collapsed right under this pressure. But they had hundreds of years of development. One of the gifts of that Greek rule, if you like, was the introduction or reintroduction, if you're kind of a nationalist from India, of stone-built architecture into the Indian subcontinent. It's not very well known that the very celebrated temples of Buddhism and of later Hinduism, they stem, the first bits of stone-built architecture, apart maybe from caves and stuff like that, come from they seem to have given it a new lease of life then, if you like. And the image I show quite often of the Ashoka pillar, which is one of the emblems or mottos, if you like, brands of the Indian, I think it's on their flag, has the famous chakra or wheel. So the chakra, there you go. And this kind of sort of as a kind of artistic wonder in its own way, being so early, the way it's been polished and carved, which is the image of India. So it owes something to this connection as well between Egypt and India. That pillar is actually known as an Ashoka pillar, and the Emperor Ashoka, Indian emperor, crops up. His name is also quite important in the story of Tantra, funny enough. But that is probably a whole digression in its own right, because there's lots of rituals and stuff that are connected with him, and lots of mythology and real things that happen because he's a real person. There's a legend, for instance, that in his time, that the Emperor Ashoka, about 2,000 years ago, there were 9 unknown men, I think it is said, who acquired all the technical knowledge, all this very secret technical knowledge, how to do things like make the pillar and polish it and everything. But having acquired it, they kind of hid it again because it was too powerful, unless it got into the wrong hands and people use it to destroy. That's a kind of common feature of India, that certain types of knowledge are so thought of as very, very dangerous. Precisely the sort of thing that the tantrics would want to reveal, because they like that. I don't know if those 9 unknown men actually exist. There's for several other sources that talk about this gathering of these adepts from all over India and stuff. I got that from quite an interesting book with a bit to make you think, which is called Morning of the Magicians. Sort of quite a story.